So what if you're the kind of person that doesn't know anything about guns? You're really wanting to get into it, but you don't know where to start and you don't even know what you know, so how do you choose your first pistol? Well, hopefully by the time we get to the end of the video, you will know almost everything you need to know on how to walk into a store, be able to choose your first pistol without looking like an idiot. Step number one is we need to define our purpose. And the reason we need to define our purpose is some handguns can actually serve one purpose far better than another purpose. For example, if you wanted to conceal carry, sometimes you're gonna look for something that's a little bit smaller, like this. Let's just pretend you live somewhere where you can't conceal carry or open carry, but you want something for the nightstand that in case there's a bump in the night, then you might want something a little bit larger. But let's just say the first two don't apply to you. Maybe you want something that's a fun range toy, something you can have a lot of fun with. It doesn't have to be the most reliable thing in the world because you're not defending your life with it. There are different guns and different features for each gun that's gonna serve each of those purposes better. Then there's also something that we call the do-all-purpose gun. Now the do-all-purpose gun is unique because it can fulfill all three of those roles and it can do it pretty well. However, it doesn't really shine at all of those roles as much as more of a more specialized gun. A good example of that would be something like this Glock 19 right here. Most people like the Glock 19 for their first handgun. Not saying that's what you need, but I'm just saying that's what people like. And this would be classified as something like a do-all-purpose gun. Reason is, it's not as small as the subcompacts, but it's also not as large as a full size. It's kind of in that Goldilocks zone in regards to sizing. You can conceal carry with it. You can also put it in the nightstand. And if you modify it like I have with this stuff on here, you can have fun like a range toy with it if you want to. I think in my own experience that an all-purpose gun is usually your best first pistol, especially when it's gonna be your only pistol for a while. So now that we've defined our purpose as looking for the all-purpose gun, now we need to look into different handgun sizes. There's roughly 4 different sizes when it comes to handguns. You have your full size, like this. These are typically gonna have a 17 or more capacity in the magazines. They're gonna have longer slides and they're gonna have longer grips. These are fantastic for not only being a nightstand gun for home defense and stuff like that, but they're also great for making them into fun range toys, or you can convert them into like competition style guns if you get the right one. However, the downside to these is they're much more difficult to conceal carry under a t-shirt or something like that. And this is gonna bring us to our compact size gun, or the Goldilocks size. Now this one happens to be a Glock 19, but there are many companies that make handguns in this sizing. This is gonna be good for concealed carry. This is also good as a nightstand gun. And this is gonna be more of your do-all-purpose sizing. But then we also have the sub-compact size. It's basically the same thickness as the Glock 19, but it has a much shorter slide and it has a much shorter grip. Downside to these is you have way less of round capacity in the magazine. And then if you want something that's even smaller than that one, we have the slimline subcompact. These are a bit different than say your Glock 26 style subcompacts because these are much thinner in the thickness, but you can see they're a little bit longer in the grip, but they hold more capacity of rounds. And so your subcompacts and your slims are gonna be really good for concealed carry because they're so much thinner in profile, they fit your body a lot easier. Some people like those for concealed carry. Personally for me, I still carry something that is the compact size. Now we need to talk about the different types of semi-auto pistols. The first style is called striker fire. The reason it's called a striker fire is there is a little trigger bar mechanism in here, has a striker in here, and then when the trigger releases, that striker lunges forward, punctures the primer, makes the round go off. But then we have hammer fired. And with hammer fired, we have 2 styles. The first type is single action only. This is a double stack 1911. Notice that the hammer is in the up position right up here, or in the down position. If I pull this trigger, nothing happens. Only happens if this is cocked to the rear, and when I pull it, it goes bang. It's called single action because when you pull the trigger only moves in one direction. And that brings us to double action / single action guns. This is a gun I recently reviewed. This is the CZ P09 Nocturne, and this is a double action single action. The reason it's called that is just like the single action only I just showed you. If the hammer's back and you pull the trigger, it goes down. But what's different about this one is if I want to shoot it again, see the hammer comes back. That's one action. When the trigger breaks, it goes home. That's your second action. Typically, in my experience, the best for a new gun owner for a first handgun is gonna be something like a striker fire. And here's why I say that. With a striker fired pistol, whenever you pull this trigger here, it's always gonna be the same exact pull weight every single time. It's always gonna be the exact pull distance every single time. Whereas with a double action, single action, if you carry the gun with the hammer down, you're always gonna have to pull this trigger much further than if this trigger is cocked all the way to the rear. Now you can see I don't have to pull the trigger as far. And the reason I think striker fire does better for first time new gun owners is because of that consistency in the striker fire trigger system, whereas this one is a learning curve. So now that we've covered the size and the different actions, now we need to talk about shootability. I categorize shootability into 3 subcategories. The first one being the recoil impulse. Sometimes people that are new to guns falsely assume that a smaller gun is gonna have far less recoil than the larger gun. But actually the opposite is true. Typically, your larger guns, because there's more weight and more mass, they have more weight to resist muzzle rise. And they're usually a lot easier to shoot, they're a lot more fun to shoot, and they're a lot easier to be accurate with. And as you go down in size, the recoil impulse or the felt recoil can seem a little bit higher. The next thing that I look at when it comes to shootability is not just the magazine capacity, but how easy is it to load the magazines. When we get to our smaller guns, you can see the grip's shorter, so we're gonna get less rounds. That's a given. And for me, I like to have as many rounds as I possibly can carry, comfortably concealed, so that if I ever did have to defend my life, no one's ever complained that they had too many rounds. And so I will conceal carry something like this and carry an extra magazine, or I'll just conceal carry something like this and already have a ton of rounds in it. However, something to keep in mind is that when it comes to these slimmer style guns that have like a 15 round capacity, but they have these slim mags, these mags, because they are so slim, have a very strong spring inside of them. And when you first get them, they're very difficult to load. In fact, I have tons of rounds through this magazine right here, so it should be broken in, but I have a very difficult time getting the 15th round into that magazine versus the magazine that comes from this gun. You can see both of these magazines hold the same amount of rounds. However, this one's bigger, but because this one's bigger, it's a lot easier to load. Now that's gonna bring us to choosing the caliber that you want in your first pistol. There's a lot of great calibers out there. The most popular and the most ubiquitous, especially when it comes to self-defense rounds, seems to be 9mm nowadays. Used to be 45 back in the day. 45 is a great option. 40 Smith & Wesson's a decent option. There's not as many guns now that are chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson as there used to be. But for semi-auto pistols, I'm gonna say 9mm is a pretty good option, but also 380 with the right ammo. And that's gonna come down to, like, if you're using this for self-defense, how do you choose the right ammo? There are tons of videos on that. For me personally, I use Federal HST and Hornady Critical Defense, which reminds me, I will have a list for absolutely everything that we're discussing in today's video. The reason that's important is I will have some info about the stuff we're talking about over there, as well as some secret. Best way to find out, first link in the description. I'll pin it in the comments. Now, the next question that kind of comes up in people's heads is, should you get a gun that has an external safety? This gun will not fire until this safety is depressed. Or should you get a gun that doesn't have an external safety? And this is something that I really struggled with when I was purchasing my first firearm. I had this weird fear that if I didn't have a safety on the gun, that I would, pull my gun out and start doing like this and accidentally press the trigger. I don't know why I had that fear, but I did. My typical advice is, if this is gonna be a self-defense pistol, I don't think that a external safety is gonna work in your favor unless you really train with the safety. The reason I say that, and this is just something I've noticed within myself, maybe you're different. I have noticed that whenever I'm at the range with a gun that has an external safety and I'm trying to do something under stress or being timed and stuff like that, whenever I go to draw my gun, I will go pull the trigger and I forget to disable the safety. And that's because I don't train with the safety very often. Versus having a gun with no external safety, you're not gonna forget when you're scared, you're just gonna pull it out and start shooting. That's my advice. Now, something that I was not aware of until I got my first gun and got a holster is, whenever you get a holster, your holster becomes the safety of your gun. And you gotta make sure that you get a holster that covers the trigger guard very well. And then that will prevent any foreign objects from getting into the trigger well and pulling the trigger, despite the fact that there's no external safety. And just FYI, all of these semi-auto pistols that we're talking about and the ones that I'll have listed over at the list, they all have multiple internal safeties that make them drop safe and all kinds of other stuff. And I'll also, over at the list, I'll have a lot of info about my favorite holsters. And now this is gonna bring us to pricing. I think pricing is very important because one of the things that I didn't know that I learned very quickly was when you purchase your first gun, you're not just buying a gun. First thing you're gonna get is your gun, obviously. Now, depending on the gun you get, some guns, like this one, the PSA Dagger, they're only gonna include one magazine with them. And if you wanna have any fun at the range, you don't want to just shoot one magazine and have to keep reloading it. Magazines, depending on the type of gun that you get, are going to be anywhere from 15 to 50 bucks. Some guns, like the newer Glocks nowadays, include 3 magazines. The next thing you're going to have to buy is ammunition. Okay, so if you are planning on using something for self-defense, you're going to have to buy 2 separate types of ammo. You're going to need to get self-defense ammo, which you're not going to shoot as often because it's about $1 a round. Then you're gonna get practice ammo. The next thing that you're probably gonna need to get, especially if you're planning on concealed carrying, and I even recommend this for a nightstand gun, is a holster. And the reason that I recommend a good holster for a nightstand gun is if you are gonna get a striker fire gun that does not have an external safety, you want some kind of safety on it. And having a Kydex holster that covers the trigger, the holster is now your safety. Don't worry, I'll have all this stuff over at the parts list so that you can browse it at your leisure if you want to. The single most important thing that you need to buy after you buy your first gun is training. Not just training in regards to, shooting and making sure you know how to run the gun. You need to know your state laws. You need to know when is it okay to use a gun in self-defense. You need to understand what to do if you had to use your gun in self-defense when you call 911, what you say, what you don't say. And so I highly suggest, even if you don't plan on concealed carrying, taking a concealed carry training course in your state. Then you want to take some actual, at least 1 or 2 beginner courses on how to properly grip the pistols, how to, make sure you align your sights properly, or the red dot if you're choosing one. And here's the weird part, is training seems like the most boring thing that you can purchase, but it's actually the most fun thing that you can purchase, and you'll learn a ton. So now we're getting to the most important part of the video of how you actually can go into a gun store, choose the very best gun for you, and how to tell if it actually fits you or not. But before we get to that, we need to cover this: gun store etiquette. Number 1, you need to follow the 4 rules of gun safety. Treat every gun as if it's loaded. Always point the muzzle in a safe direction. Don't ever take a gun from a gun store clerk and immediately start doing this. I'll show you how to do that properly here in a second, but don't start pointing the gun around, especially at the clerk or other people in the store. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to press it. We'll talk more about that in a second as well. Be sure of what you're aiming at and what's beyond what you're aiming at, because bullets go through things. Whenever you go into a gun store, and the first thing you want to do is be very transparent with the clerk there that you're new to this and you're looking into getting into it. The reason I think that's important is, number 1, if you did make some kind of mistake where you did like this, started aiming it, they're not going to judge you as harshly, and they will be more patient with you knowing that you're a newbie. The second thing is, usually when you're in a gun store and you ask to see a gun, the clerk is going to take the gun, he's going to lock it open, he's going to check it to make sure that it's empty. Then he's going to either hand it to you in this position here, or he will let the slide go home and hand it to you like that. When he does that, you're also gonna check the chamber. You need to check it even though he's checked it, because what if he didn't see a casing in there? I've seen lots of CCTV footage of that happening in gun stores, especially with used guns that they take in on trade. Then if you want to try the trigger press, you want to ask the clerk if it's okay. And ask them, where is a safe direction for me to point this to test the trigger? I just literally aim it straight down at the floor between my feet when I'm testing a trigger, because I want to see how it feels and do a little bit of dry fire. But you always want to ask, because what if there is a basement below you where people are working? This next thing I wanted to bring up is always be careful when taking purchasing advice from a gun store clerk. Now, there are many gun stores out there that really care about the consumer and them making the right choice, because they care about getting repeat business and they want you to have a great experience. But I have experienced some gun stores where the owner inherited it from his dad or something. He doesn't really give a crap, and he's just trying to sell whichever gun he can sell at the highest profit margin. And so don't ever feel like you have to buy something that day. It's okay to leave and come back. I did that when I bought my first gun. Now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of how do you determine what fits your hand the best? Let's dive up close for this real quick, because this is very important. So whenever you're going into a gun store and you're wanting to test and hold some guns to see how they fit your hand, there are a few key areas that we really need to pay attention to maximize the chances of getting a pistol that's gonna fit you the best. The first thing I look at when I grip a gun is gonna be my index finger length in relation to this trigger guard here. Some pistols, your finger will reach beyond the trigger guard. When you grip it, you wanna make sure that the pistol slide is in alignment with your forearm. You don't want it cocked like this. You don't want it cocked like this. It needs to be perfectly straight. And I wanna see where my finger lands on that trigger guard. And the reason that's important is when we come from our index position here and we wanna shoot, we wanna make sure that our finger doesn't get caught up on the front of this trigger guard. There have been some in the past where I would catch that all the time. The second thing I wanna check, I wanna see where my pinkies land. And I wanna test this by gripping the gun like this. And then I want to push up and see how much force it takes for that to slide. Some guns, like this one here, you'll notice that my pinky falls off a little bit until I have a magazine inserted. You'll notice that this one, it actually does slide a little bit. Here's why. We gotta look at a couple of things known as texturing and the ergonomics. So for example, if we're looking at this frame, you'll notice how this texturing here goes all the way up here. The texturing here on this front strap leaves only a tiny gap of non-textured surface. This here is your front strap. We got really good texturing here. And this here is your back strap. You got good texturing back here. But also you'll notice right here, there's a little bit of a lip at the end of the grip. In this one, you'll notice it's almost the opposite. The texture does not go all the way up. This part here is completely void of any texturing. You'll notice on this back strap here, there's a lot of slippery areas back here on the sides. You'll also notice on this front strap, although there is texturing, these spots here are very wide and bald. That's very important because when you go to grip the pistol, your fingers are gonna land right here and you're gonna be putting a lot of force on that. And I've found that my fingers landing there, it makes it wanna slide. You'll also notice there is a tiny lip there, but it's nowhere near as pronounced as the lip on here. And don't worry, there's aftermarket accessories and stuff called mag wells that you can get that will enhance that, but you wanna maximize the most you can get, from the get-go. I like a grip that tends to go all the way up the side. I like a grip that has it all almost completely across the front strap and the back strap. And if possible, and this one's a little bit harder to find in factory guns, I want a little bit of a ledge right here with texturing so that when I'm gripping my gun, my support thumb can ride on that and push down to mitigate recoil. That part's not the most important part, but the others are very, very important. I find that my grip is perfect when my knuckles land on this outside edge right there, okay? So you notice how my knuckles here, they're not too far in, like in the front. They're not too far out over here. They're right at this crest right here. That's why I like having a lot of texture there. The reason I like that is when I go for my support hand, I can put these knuckles right into these knuckles, and then I can put the heel of this hand right along this texturing here, and I can squeeze it like a vise, put my thumbs forward like this, and then I can grab this texturing here. Now this gun, although it doesn't have a ton of texturing here, is a gun that I can grip really, really well. However, this gun, on the other hand, is a gun that I can't grip. And here's how I test it, okay? I get my firing grip, and what I do is I try to lock my support hand, and I try to rotate my firing hand back like this. I wanna see how much slip I can get. And with this one, I get a lot of slip because of this bald area. It's so slippery. I have to squeeze really hard for that not to slide. Whereas another gun, let's say like the CZP-10C, it has that same bald area, but because the ergonomics of it are a little bit different, I can't make it break. Very interesting. And so that's something you want to test as well. You want to, when you're at the gun store, and you're testing all this to see what the texture is like, see if your fingers slip, you want to grip it and try to move your firing hand and see if your support hand holds it and the texture supports where your hand is landing. That's very, very critical. In addition to grip, you also want to make sure that you can reach the controls of the gun. Here's what I mean by that. With this gun, for example, you want to grab it in your firing grip. You want to see when you want to reach that magazine release, do you have to readjust your hands? For some of you guys, you're gonna have smaller hands and it's gonna be unavoidable. And what I mean by that is if you're shooting the gun, you're like bang, 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 can you just drop that mag without readjusting your grip? Some people might have to readjust their grip and then press that button. But if possible, you wanna get one that's gonna fit your hand so well that your thumb naturally is gonna land there when you need to use it. The other thing you wanna test is, does your support hand interfere with the slide lock, slide release? This is very, very important, and here's why. So this is a Glock 34 that I built years ago. You'll notice this slide stop, slide release right here kind of sticks out a little bit. On normal Glocks, that slide stop, slide release doesn't actually protrude out that much. With this, what happens with me is my support hand, as you can see, is touching it. And when this gun's recoiling, if it slides out a little bit and then it comes back down, you will get what's called premature slide lock, meaning your slide lock's open even though you're not out of ammo. And unfortunately, this isn't going to be something that you can really test until you shoot the gun, but it is something that you can get a good feel for just holding it at the gun store. Now, speaking of the slide lock, slide release, I prefer getting a gun where I can reach it. If I was going to do a reload, for example, there's nothing in this mag. I want to be able to just grab that, drop that home without having to readjust my grip. Not all guns are going to be like that. Here's a good example of one. So this is not a striker fire gun, but you'll get the gist. When you go to reload, it's going to be really difficult to grab that. You know what I mean? Because I'm hitting a decocker right here. You don't want to hit that. So with this one, you kind of have to use your support hand to send it home. That's not bad, but that is something that you have to kind of learn to train around, especially if you're used to just dropping it with one hand every single time. Something that is kind of a nice to have, but isn't a must, is having contoured a trigger guard. Now this one was done after the fact by someone who stippled this gun, but there are more and more newer guns that are coming out with these undercutted trigger guards. Now, if we compare this Glock to a factory Glock frame, you'll notice that under here, it kind of protrudes out a little bit, and this can give you like a callus, which you could see here on my middle finger, where it rubs on my knuckle right here. Some factory frames are a little bit beveled out on that trigger guard, and you don't get that knuckle callus as bad. I think this one here from CZ has a really good undercut trigger guard right here. Some of them have texturing on the front of the trigger guard if you wanted to hook it. I don't shoot like that, but some do. And that's just a nice little bonus feature if the gun that you're looking at happens to have it. So now that we've tested how it fits our hands, there's a few other questions that we need to answer so that we can, really narrow down what is the best gun for us. This is hands down the most important part of this entire video. You need to find a gun range that rents guns. What you want to do is you want to make a list of the top 3 to 5 guns that you're interested in purchasing. If that range is 100 miles away, you want to make this trip and you want to go there and rent all 5 of those guns. You want to get you a paper target from the range. Ideally, you want to get one of those paper targets that has multiple circles on it. You're going to go to the range, you're going to set that up 15 feet away. You want to get a target for each specific gun that you're shooting. And the reason I say this is you're going to shoot at one circle and you might miss the circle completely. And that's totally okay. That's not what we're looking for. As you continue shooting, you'll notice that your shot groupings are going to get closer. So you're going to look at the first one all the way down until like the 8th or 9th circle, depending on what target you get. Then you want to go turn that gun back in, rent the next gun, get the next target, and do the same thing. What you're going to be looking for while you're at the range is, number 1, which gun felt the most natural in my hand and which one seemed to be easiest to shoot. And then you're going to ask the second question. You're going to go analyze your targets. And you want to look at the last circle that you shot at. The reason that I say that is as you shoot, you seem to get a little bit better, okay? So if there was 9 circles on that target, just look at the last 2. See which one had the tightest groups. I took a little notepad and I wrote down, wow, I really feel, super confident with this gun, but I was super inaccurate with it. Well, that's not the gun I want. So then I went to the next one that I felt the most comfortable with, that I was the most accurate with, and that was the gun that I bought, and that just happened to be a Glock 19. At the time, I picked up a Gen 4 because that's what was available. I didn't purchase the gun based on anyone else's advice, except for I knew that Glock was reliable, and I tested that against a Smith & Wesson M&P. I tested it, this is the M&P 1.0s, not the new ones. I tested it against a Springfield XDM and a Ruger SR9C. And I even made 2 separate trips to the range, tested all 4 of those guns, and every single time I was the most comfortable with the Glock 19, and I was the most accurate with it. Here's the thing. I do have some favorite pistols that I highly recommend for first-time gun buyers. And I have a complete video breakdown right here that you can go watch on everything you need to know about the top 5 to 7 pistols for first-time buyers. However, there is one gun that is not on that list because it didn't come in until way later. But I do have a complete video about that right here. And I go into all the detail about that specific gun because I do think that this is a phenomenal gun for first-time gun buyers. But let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments section. Until next time, I love you, and you guys stay sexy.